Thank you for having me.
So today we're talking about government and the threats it brings to the automotive industry. This is an industry that I deeply care about. I grew up as a car guy almost since I was born. My family were taking me to car shows. I've been going through driving events throughout my life. I'm a subscriber to Motor Trend, Car and Driver, Auto Week, all the good things. And I'm very concerned about the left and the direction that we're headed. Just a real quick story, an example. About a year or so ago, I made a purchase. I bought a 1991 M923 A2. Does anyone in the audience know what that is?
It's basically a house with tires.
Exactly. It is a military truck, a 5-ton troop transporter. It has
What kind of fuel economy do you get with it?
I was just about to say, I don't think you measure that miles per gallon. It's probably feet per gallon.
Correct.
And it's everything the left hates. It's big, it's loud, and the efficiency is just atrocious. And it's fun to drive. That's why they hate it. And when I bought it, and believe it or not, I bought it on Facebook Marketplace. It's almost amazing what you can buy these days. But I bought it, and I titled it. I'm from Maryland. I got it titled in Maryland, insured, and really on the road. And I would say right after I bought it, I started looking at some other forums, trying to get more information about the truck, minded enthusiasts, and I quickly found that in a lot of states across the country, an everyday guy like myself can't buy or own one of these trucks. And this is kind of, I think, the left's first hidden attack at the state level. And basically what they're doing is these trucks have the designation of off-road use. So the left, the more environmental, progressive, the real extreme side is going around and basically telling departments of transportation that these vehicles are designated for off-road use and therefore can't be titled and need to be taken off the road. And that's just, terrifying for me that I own this truck, but, just one day that these environmentalists can step in and take it off the road. So I am, very concerned about the left and what's taking place, and I know this is just the beginning. And I want to turn it now over to you. What are some of these other attacks that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think I have the luxury of having been in the industry. I'm outside the industry now. I can kind of sound a little bit of a clarion call, if you will. I see several things that are troubling, that are occurring, especially in the automotive magazines, if you read them. There's a push towards electric vehicles, really at any cost, and I would caution you, at any cost. President Biden has already said that he's allocating $400 billion towards electric vehicles. And in one article I saw, they said probably most of that's going to go to just catching up on charging stations. Now, charging stations for currently about 0.5% to 2% of the vehicles on the road, depending how you count a plug-in, if it's a hybrid or if it just has to be plugged in. So electric. Then there's autonomous vehicles, this notion that it'd be great if your cars could drive you everywhere. And I got to say, at first pass, I also said that'd be great, until you start thinking through logically, well, how do we get there from here? And then there's also this idea of mobility. So we're not talking about driving anymore. You remember, you could revoke driving privileges. I think that's even part of it. No, mobility is a right. And happening to be an attorney, there's this thing called false imprisonment when you restrict somebody's mobility. If if I hamper your ability to leave this room and I block the doors, at some point you might be able to bring at least a lawsuit against me for false imprisonment. So this idea of mobility, I think the left is often clever at picking the right words, the way to describe things. So mobility, and then mobility as a right, and it's the cousin, if you will, of what Europe is experimenting with called mobility as a service. And that is, in short, you'll take out your phone and say, CPAC's been great, I now want to go back to my hotel. You'll tap the application that the government will provide you, and it'll say, good news, there's an electric scooter for you to use outside. Take the electric scooter, you'll be able to catch the electric bike. There's an electric bike reserved for you. When you get done with the electric bike, make sure you get on the bus. The bus is going to leave at this time. And you say, well, you know, actually, I'd like to just take a car. Somehow they're going to disincentivize you from doing that because this is now very not green friendly. So it's going to either just cost more, easy way to do it, or there's going to be an excise tax put on you, or they're going to keep track of your carbon credits and say, I'm sorry, you've used up your carbon credits, or do you really want to use those today? It's a pretty nice day. Maybe you should walk. And I see all this occurring, and I think if you start to look, you'll see that it's peeking out everywhere.
And another thing you hear, you mentioned the electrification and all these vehicles. Well, the left likes to say, well, they're good because they save money. Look at how cheap electricity is and how cheap it is to operate these things. Shouldn't everyone want to buy electric vehicles?
Well, first of all, electric vehicles are not that cheap. You as a taxpayer are helping subsidize them through a tax credit. They've tried to make it so it's not just subsidizing rich people who are buying Teslas anymore, but our federal government has been giving a generous tax credit to help make the cost of electric vehicles only slightly, in some cases, still pretty absurd. The price people were paying for Priuses with their load-carrying capacity and the ability to take your family on trips and other things was still pretty high. But another factor of the electric cars, again, see if you've heard anything about this. Everybody here knows what it costs to replace an electric battery in a car, right? One of these electric cars? No, probably not, because it is really hard to find much said at all. And I think Bob Norton's opinion is what you do find is actually false information. For example, you're being told it'll cost about $3,000. That is a huge asterisk that says probably in the future, given the fact we're going to be producing a lot more of them. What does it cost today to replace a battery on your Tesla? And I don't think that Elon Musk really wants to talk about this much because they're covering them all under warranty. But there's one person who did something stupid with their Tesla where even Tesla said, okay, that's stupid. We're not covering that. When the person paid for the battery, it cost him $13,700. So that alone is like not being really focused on, wow, I've saved money, if you did even save money. We can talk about that. But if it was cheaper than buying gas and then later in the future you're going to have to replace a battery, all of your savings have just gone up in smoke.
And I guess that even makes sense because I just sometimes go on to like Craigslist and it just kind of looking at, how much would it cost to buy like a secondhand electric car? And I just noticed that the prices of like some of those first generation, like the Chevy Volt, the Nissan Leaf, they seem pretty inexpensive. So is that, I guess, largely because of the batteries and the cost to replace those?
I don't know, but if this guy can find a vehicle the size of a truck and he's also finding Leafs on Facebook Marketplace, this guy's good at Facebook Marketplace. But I don't know exactly if it's because the market doesn't really know what to do with these used vehicles. But another issue is what's going to happen when the battery goes to heaven, right? How much does a battery weigh in one of these electric cars? About 500 to 1,300 pounds. That's a big battery. If you think about the battery in your car, what's that weigh, 15 pounds maybe? So that battery when it goes to heaven, as I like to say. But first thing they say, don't worry, we won't throw them away. We're going to take them out of the car. We're going to add them to the grid. Okay? Then what? And by the way, search Google and try to find the ultimate end answer on that, and you're going to find it's amazingly scarce as to what you're going to read. But even to have made the battery, you need scarce rare metals. They've got names I can't even pronounce. They're very long, complicated names, but the term rare metals says it all. So we're going to have everybody in America, now we have 0.5% of the cars that are electric. We're going to get 60% even of them. What's going to happen to the price of that rare metal? And then also to get to these rare metals, I'm told it's an environmental disaster. Many of the third world countries and that where they come from, they wreak a lot of environmental havoc. But are you hearing much about that? Because there's an agenda here. The agenda is electric can be controlled more easily by the government. We're going to centralize the production of that. We're going to charge you whatever it costs. And you will pay it because you'll have no other choice. Ask Texas how it felt when suddenly electric costs went up. Their options are pretty limited. So I think we just need to be paying attention to what's going on out there.
And it's funny you bring up, the environmental side and the pollution and how that's, not the case. How about like even traffic? I know that's another thing that the left likes to say with all these autonomous vehicles, we'll have better communication. Well, we'll reduce traffic and get people around quicker. Is that true either?
Yeah, I gave a talk in Ann Arbor to the National Association of Right-of-Way. I didn't know there was such an association, but people who take property for governmental entities, and they do this for a living. So I looked into the issue of what claims are being made about self-driving cars, and they're pretty audacious. I mean, one of the claims is that it will reduce traffic by 94%. Wow. And by the way, I think they maybe even made a mistake because they also say it will reduce accidents by 94%. Well, 94% less cars on the freeways is a lot less. And the only way you could even attempt to get there is, of course, by ride sharing. That's also baked into it, this idea of ride pooling and ride sharing, which again, first pass, you go, that's a good idea. I mean, that's a nice idea. Until you think, well, how would that work? I want my kids to be able to go to soccer while I'm at work. They'll touch their social app. The car will whoosh up for them. The door will open. And I like to picture maybe there's an elderly woman who's got a plate of cookies for them. She's very sweet. And she tells them, maybe she reads them a story. But what if it's not? What if it's a pedophile? Maybe this pedophile has even found a way to be riding around in the car all day long. Well, as you look at the articles and the white papers that have been done, well, that's why, obviously, we'll need to know everybody who's in every car. So we'll just either have it by some ID you'll have, facial recognition, which the Chinese are getting very good at, or even retina scan. So we'll know everybody who's in every car. We'll never put your kids in the car with a pedophile. But how am I assuring everybody's mobility, and how am I reducing the amount of traffic that's on the road? So then you got to start rationing other people too. I have a sister who's mentally challenged. She's got the mentality of about an 8-year-old. She would love, love, love it if she could push a button and take a car anywhere she wants to go today. And my mother has medical issues. She's 84 years old. She'd love it if she didn't have to bother everybody. So all of a sudden, people who are not able to drive are able to drive because, remember, mobility is a right. So suddenly they've got this ability to call these vehicles. We're going to have to accommodate it if it's a right. So we're going to probably make some very tough calls as to, well, the pedophile can't be in the car with somebody under the age of 11. After that, you should be able to, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I want my mom in the car with a pedophile either, no offense, but I'm not sure I do. And then, of course, we go back to COVID. What if the person's got a temperature and they're going to be in a rideshare car? In the era that we've been in Michigan, can anyone be in that car for the next week, is what our governor would have said. But let alone could somebody else be in the car with that person. Who's going to clean the car? Who maintains it? Is it government property? And that's another agenda, by the way, that you shouldn't be owning that big vehicle. You shouldn't own a car in general. You should just have mobility as a service. You don't need to own vehicles anymore.
Wow, getting rid of private ownership of vehicles, that's where they're headed. I know in the automotive kind of regulatory realm, there's something been around for a number of years called the CAFE standards, and that's not coffee. That stands for Corporate Average Fuel Economy. I think it started in the 1970s as a response to the gas crisis and all that. What does that look like today, and where do you see those regulations driving the market?
Yeah, it's a great example. I've been dealing with this much of my professional life, and I've used a lot of analogies along the way. So it is the idea that a company can only produce a fleet of vehicles that meets a certain standard, a certain mile per gallon. Anybody here know, we can have a trivia question, anybody know what under the Obama era, the corporate average, not the best vehicle you have, what was supposed to be the average fuel economy of the fleet of vehicles you produce if you're Ford, GM, Chevy, you make trucks, you make cars. What was the average? What's a good goal? 32 or 34, the gentleman says. He is so 1999-ish. 52 and a half miles per gallon, average. You'll have some that might be a little worse, but you're going to get to 52 and a half. Ridiculous, right, is what those of us in the industry, by the way. And you might like to know that when I was in the industry as Assistant General Counsel for a major car company, if I even spoke as freely as I've just spoken, I would be fired. I would know, I've just said this and I've got my other job lined up, because you do not dare pick a fight with the federal government. And in the case of CAFE standards, as you mentioned, you're picking a fight with the EPA and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And CEOs do not like you to pick a fight with the two entities that control their very existence. So there's a huge incentive when you say, but Ford and GM love this. Believe me, the first time I went in to have a fight with the federal government, a gentleman from General Motors was kind enough to tell me, you might want to be careful in there or you'll be fired today by the end of the day. I thought, he might be right. I'll be a slightly more polite. And I will tell you that in my 20 years or so, I had 3 different times where the CEO was called by a government agency and basically told you need to fire that guy. And the CEO, in one case, happened to be a German national, Dieter Zetsche, to give him credit. And he's like, I think it's okay that they're upset with you, don't you? I said, I agree with you. I think I should stay employed. But they basically called to put pressure to that specific level. This guy doesn't know his manners. He's not going along with what we tell him. So I just think that you need to understand right now in particular, I think this administration has made it very clear. I think President Biden would want me to say how in favor of a Green New Deal world he is, and that should cause all of us to pause because they're going to put taxes on the vehicle you have. They're going to put excise taxes on it. They'll make it illegal. And in order to get to this utopian world where the cars drive around like the Jetsons, you cannot have any individual humans on motorcycles, bicycles, doing any other kind of driving. I have a 57 Chevy convertible, and you can't even modify that car. It's not like you just put some device on it and you're good. It's got to be part of the whole computer network and let the controls be controlled. And I think we need to, pardon the pun, but tap the brakes a bit on this self-driving future that we're being taken into at a very high speed.
Yes, and that's my fear too, with like even my military truck. How do you make these types of vehicles, compatible? It seems to me that you'd have to have like different softwares and all this stuff, which these old cars don't have. So I mean, do you think it will get to the point where we won't be able to drive, like your old Chevy and my truck?
Well, so when I was in the industry, I gave a talk once at George Mason University, circa 2002-ish, I think. And at that time, all we in the industry wanted to know was would the federal government let us have something called an I am here prompt. So basically a transponder on a car that says, I am a car, and could we just get approval for that? And that would have been able to have modifications for cars on the market today. You would have bought them, I think we said for $39, and stuck it on the trunk of your car, plugged it into your wiring harness or changed the battery. And for example, if those of you who paid attention to the news in Texas about the 100-car pileup and 3 people being killed, that could be completely avoided if you gave people just the simple ability for their car to hear, hey, traffic ahead has stopped for some reason. That'd be very useful whenever there's fog, whiteout, et cetera. And we in the industry thought that would probably be a reasonable thing. That's called vehicle-to-vehicle, V2V communication. I came back from the meeting. My job was to go say, did your talk go well enough you think we're going to do this? Because you got to make wiring harnesses 5 years in advance and have the little lead on it. And I said, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to go there. And I was right, because here we are in 2021, and we still don't even have a transponder in your car or your military truck. We would see your military truck from another state. But
Yeah.
other vehicles, it's kind of good to know when you come up over the crust that there's say a 2-seater convertible that I also have one of. And you might be in your vehicle. And I kind of want you to know, hey, he's going 10 miles an hour, you're going 60. Does it go 60?
Maybe downhill.
Okay. But in any event, you'd want people, you want a truck in a whiteout in Texas to say, I'm going 70 miles an hour and I've just received a signal that everybody ahead of me is going 0. So there are things we could have done to modify vehicles, but now we are leapfrogging over all of the driver benefits. Some of us are fortunate enough to have cars that have the side object detection, adaptive cruise control. It applies your brakes harder for you, but that's not very much of the vehicles that are on the road today. There aren't very many of those vehicles that have those devices. If we're really seriously interested in the safety aspect of it, we could incentivize. If we're going to give tax credits for electric cars, maybe we give some kind of tax credit for people buying safety devices. Some of the studies that were done about autonomous vehicles, you might be happy to know, shockingly, Americans, the studies were done in the United States through University of Michigan and other places, it turns out drivers are pretty smart. Human beings do a pretty darn good job. Better than these claims that have been made of, stupid people could never compete with a computer. Well, it turns out if I'm behind your military vehicle in a self-driving car and you suddenly swerve out of the way and there's a solid object, unless your vehicle was connected to some network, the self-driving car has the same problem that human beings had. So claims of 94% safer was because 94% of accidents were said to have some degree of human error in them. But when they looked at it, it's about 30% maybe that you would correct. So again, if you're going to spend trillions to save 30% of the accidents, but we haven't even tried making the human drivers safer. So, and on the energy side, just to say this because I think this group might be interested, when I was at the car companies, you often have these difficult issues. You're trying to look ahead. And I had proposed methanol being a serious effort that we got behind, because methanol can be made out of anything, really. Ethanol can only be made out of plants that have a lot of sugar in them. So, and switchgrass, thanks to General Motors spending $1.5 billion to find switchgrass. But you can make methanol out of dirty diapers, out of landfill waste, out of any kind of leaves. In Michigan, we have a lot of leaves that fall off the trees every fall, and lawn clippings, etc. And they said, great idea, Bob. It would be great. It'd be more abundant, but it's not out there now. We got to live in the real world. The government doesn't like it, by the way. We're not going to make the government mad. We're going to get back on our lane here. And at that time, Mercedes, we went down hydrogen because California said they were going to make the hydrogen highway. So we spent billions of dollars in developing hydrogen vehicles, and then California didn't come through. But way down the list of things we thought would be reasonable alternatives was electricity. Biodiesel was above that. Adding more alcohol to the regular gasoline, hybrid vehicles even that had a gas motor that would charge up. But we're trying to leap all the way to the electric world, which would have consequences for our home electric bills. So if we've got to take one study done showed you'd have to at least double it. But if it's double, triple, or quadruple, because the study that said double presumed one electric car per household. How many of our households only have one car? When I moved to England in 1998, 15% of the households in England did not have a car at all. And I can tell you that taking the train looks romantic in BBC series, but it's not nearly as fun if you go, oh, you've just missed your train, there's another one in 3 hours. It's not nearly as romantic as it feels. But in the United States at that time, I think it was 2.3 vehicles per household, at least in the areas where I lived. So that study with one vehicle said doubling the capacity of our grid. Other people say it's 300 to 400%. And we're not even at this 25% alternative energy goal that we have now, where about 5% of our energy is made by solar and wind. If we're going to now have to say 400% more electricity, all the electricity we use today would have to be being produced by those alternative means. So a lot more windmills, a lot more solar, and a lot more cost.
And it's funny you mentioned that, and all these renewable standards and all that. That's something that ACU, we have a ratings program where we evaluate essentially all the issues that are brought forward in the states. We look at about 105,000 bills every single year. And one of the things we keep coming across are all these renewable energy mandates, requiring that so much of your energy comes from solar, wind, and all that, and of course these cap and trade. So I was just wondering, what does a full just renewable energy portfolio really mean for other sectors around cars? Like I'm guessing the trucking industry and stuff is also going to be impacted.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to have to think deep thoughts about that, but even I can imagine that if you're going to make a 400% improvement in the electric grid, you're going to need a lot of copper. And those of you paying attention to commodities, copper is one of those that's been spiking lately. That's why people have been stealing it out of old buildings and that, right? So can you imagine a world where there's a sudden huge demand for copper and a huge demand on these rare metals? And we're not sure what we're going to do with these batteries when they're done. I often say, I think Hillsdale teaches us to think ahead. We're supposed to be good, responsible people that are here on this earth. What are our grandkids going to say about this? Our great-grandkids are going to say, hey, what's with all these batteries you people left behind? We're going to say, no, it was very sophisticated and smart. You just don't understand. And, thanks for, all of you take your home electric bill, and in your head now multiply it by 4, and let's see how many people, if you didn't have masks on, would be smiling, right? And the thing is, you could say, well, I won't drive, I'm going to drive my military truck. Your electric bill will still go up by 4 if that's what we have to do, because people don't realize the way your electric bill's set is that the utility companies come to the Public Service Commission. We even have a little electric company in Hillsdale, but they still follow the same idea. Here's our costs, and we need to pay back those plus a little extra. And so that's how your utility rates are set. And you can say, well, I really wish they wouldn't have put in those extra 350 windmills in my electrical grid. And the answer to that will be tough. So back to the beginning, at any cost is what worries me. I love the idea of windmills and solar, and that can produce some electricity. I love the idea of common sense conservatism, but I don't like this at any cost, and I think we should all be paying attention because it will be astronomically expensive. The self-driving vehicles part of, if you look at the websites about what's really cool, and the University of Michigan, where I got my law degree, and I lived in Ann Arbor for 17 years, they run these cars in high-speed shuttles on the freeway. They get special permission. They run them at 85, 90 miles an hour. They're all talking to each other. That's pretty cool, gotta admit. But the only way the cars go from, say, 60 to 95 is you have to have an acceleration lane. And then once you want to get out of shuttle, brake shuttle, you ask permission, by the way. to brake shuttle, and then you need a deceleration lane. So the good news is, if we're going to go to the high-speed shuttle, all we have to do with our freeways in the United States is add at least 2 or 3 more lanes. That won't cost much. But it's worth it because you're going to reduce traffic by 94% and safety is going to improve by 94%. So this is great. So there's a lot of hyperbole. I think there's a lot of myths here. There's a lot of reason for us to say, let's just take another look at this.
Until you bring up the costs and all that. So of course, you have a lot of these regulations, the economic costs, subsidizing, I think at the federal level they have a $7,500 or so tax credit and all that. But I know too from CAFE there's been some concerns that there's also costs as far as safety that are unintentional. Kind of how have you heard much about that, and what is the, I guess, safety consequences of that?
Yeah, I mean, back to the CAFE standards we're talking about again. It's so amazing the degree to which you're playing the game of complying with CAFE standards in the industry. We would try to decide at Chrysler, how many Vipers can we build? How many Hemi engines? If you all liked Hemi engines, I was there when we had those commercials that said that thing got a Hemi in it.
I have a Dodge Charger 2006 with that favorite engine.
My family thanks you. So the idea was, though, that these high-powered engines, well, how many of those can we build? And then we have to make some vehicles, like in this era, it would be electric vehicles. We made a low-speed electric vehicle, by the way, in Fargo, North Dakota. And we made these low-speed vehicles because of the CAFE credit. Nobody wanted a vehicle that couldn't go over 25 miles an hour for the price tag it would have really required. We subsidized those, gave them away to airports and campuses and other places, but just for the CAFE credit. So one of the analogies I used, I remember using it because it made my son, who's 33 now, cry as a small boy in the back seat. I said, what if McDonald's said, every time you serve a hamburger, you can only sell so many French fries. You've got to put broccoli on every other plate. You've got to put an apple on people's tray, whether they want it or not. Build it into the cost of fast food. So my son in the back seat misheard the conversation he was overhearing. He started to cry because there wasn't going to be French fries in the future. And I said, no, Dad's just talking about this. Nobody's messing with McDonald's. And now in 2021, we go, yeah, that could happen. Michelle Obama and others might have wanted that to happen, right? So they've even gotten to the point where let's tell the fast food industry what you can serve. But in the car industry, you have to build the cars about 5 years in advance. You need all your suppliers to have the rear view mirrors, the carpeting, the seats, and they've got a plan for that. So you have to know 5 years from now what consumers are going to want, what engines are going to be in them, and you're playing this game of predicting what your fleet is going to be comprised of, having to tell the federal government, by the way, which we hated. We drive cars around with masks and everything to hide them. You're turning in paperwork to the government, and they're like, trust us, we'll keep it secret. And now you're going to have to try to go to the recipe you set 5 years. Does anybody know what gas prices are going to be 5 years from now? Because a lot of people could make a lot of money if you do. So that's the problem, but it's only because of this kabuki dance that we've been doing since the 1970s. Started with the oil embargo, and the government came in to help us. And of course, it's now continued to creep as we go along as to what they're helping us do. But safety, to make sure I answer that. So you want lighter weight vehicles. In order to lighter weight vehicles get better fuel economy. Lighter weight isn't always the safest. And then in other instances, the government will say we want more roof strength in these cars. So I went with a physicist once to try to explain to the government why more roof strength meant more weight higher up on the cars, which meant cars could flip over more, and it also meant the cars were moving faster and harder to slow down. At the end of the day, the government's like, we want it all. We want the fuel economy, we want the roof strength, we want the cars to be lighter, but we want them stronger. And it's amazing what it does to the industry, the airbag mandates, the other things you have. And by the way, we want the consumers to be able to afford these cars. So they, at any cost, again, is something you should focus on. And who's it going to hurt more? People at the high end of the socioeconomic ladder, or the lower end people that clean this facility here that we're in today? God love those people. Who gets hurt more when we say, throw another $5,000 on the car for safety or for self-driving features? I feel sorry for those people. Many of my family members are such people, right? So I feel like we need to take care of those people, and this lofty goal of a hydrocarbon-free future, I think, is being overstated, and the price tags being far marginalized.
It's funny you bring up the price tags, because there was just a report that came out, I think last quarter, that the average new sale transaction price of a new vehicle, just surpassed $40,000. And a used vehicle the average transaction price is almost $27,000. I guess my question is, a lot of times, almost every time with regulations, there's some companies that benefit while some don't. Is that kind of the case here with the regulations, such as CAFE and all that? Are there certain manufacturers that are, I guess, like the regulation and others hate it, or how does that work?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the certain beneficiary of this has been Tesla. And again, if I was in the industry, I'd have to be careful because all of the big three, in fact, it's the big two and one that's now owned by some foreign companies, but the big three would be, getting on board with this electric world. But Tesla's been making a tremendous amount of money through the credits they're able to sell. That cafe world, that game of cafe, if you've got extra credits, you can sell them to other companies. A major part of the revenue, I think it exceeds the revenue and other profit they would have made, is from selling off their extra credit that they get to sell. Also, Tesla's been a beneficiary of some very lucrative loan arrangements with the federal government because we favor that. It's a $454 million, virtually no interest loan they made. Ford, after the automotive bailout, and I was at Chrysler when all that occurred, but Ford, I think, received a $6 billion, zero interest, zero repayment Department of Energy loan to build more fuel-efficient vehicles. But they weren't bailed out. I often say in my family, when you get a $6 billion no repayment loan, that feels a lot like a bailout. So the government's putting money. We remember Solyndra. Solyndra was part of the solar energy. Again, the federal government's trying to pick winners and losers here. The only thing they're sure is the absolute losers are combustion engines and using gasoline or diesel. And I want to say just a little prayer even for the combustion engine, right? I mean, combustion engine, I believe, is the most refined consumer product in the planet. I've said that for years now, and nobody's really come back and said something that's more, because there's been billions and billions of dollars put in to combustion engines to get them to the efficiency they're at now. And if you're not a gearhead like you and I are, you just need to understand you can get 2 to 3 times more power out of an engine with better fuel economy. And that's very difficult for you to say you've done with your gas oven at your house or with your hot water heater or other things. We've improved those some, but not 300% better for less. So it's a shame we're not keeping a reliable, durable part of American life. If you want to go off and if you want to see Mount Rushmore, you really like the last speaker and you want to go out there to her warmer Dakota State, you're going to go out that way, you're going to want to not have to stop and have a 45-minute charge every time that you get to maybe 200 miles. Because again, when you look at the range of the vehicles, that's the optimum range, not fully loaded with the wife, dog, kids, grandma, all the camping gear, because that starts to really kill your range, and now you're going to have to recharge every time. It takes about as much to charge a vehicle to go to 100 miles as the average house uses in a day of electricity. So for all of your air conditioning, your heating, all the lights, that's per charge, and that goes 100 miles. And it's going to take 15 to 45 minutes. 15 minutes is the predictions of the future. Let's hold them at that. Tomorrow when you go to fill up with gas, next time you go to fill up with gas, do me the favor, take and set a timer and sit there for 15 minutes. See if it feels like a long time. You'll probably say, I loved it, I got out a book. But then set it for 45 minutes and then say, I'm really looking forward to the future when I'm going to have that kind of charging time. And where are we going to charge on a busy holiday travel? Where are we going to have 45-minute stations for these places for people to charge? I think the people that are way ahead of us in this agenda say they're not going to be traveling like that anymore, Bob. You don't understand. They're going to take public transportation. They're going to stay home because they don't need to travel. They're going to Zoom to that beach vacation in the summer. They're not going to really go there. So I just think there's lots to be worried about.
Yeah. I know we only have a couple more minutes, but one thing here at CPAC, we always talk about, the Constitution and principles of limited government and all that. What are some of, I guess, the constitutional issues that you see with what's going on today?
Well, the notions, we might say Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure, right? And again, the government actors would be who'd be involved there. But the government knowing where you're at, restricting your mobility, even Fifth Amendment, if what you're doing was illegal, but we should maybe not extol that as a virtue. But certainly just the right of freedom and liberty. As Americans, part of our culture that other countries have envied is this notion of going out, putting your key in your car, and being able to drive across state lines, no restrictions. That future, I think, is being threatened as to one where your mobility will be both a right and it will be rationed by the government.
Well, I think we've just about run out of time, but again, I just want to thank you again, Bob. You're obviously one of the greatest experts on this, and it's just, we'll have to see just how long we have and kind of what pushback the conservative movement is going to put against the left here. But, thanks again for coming here.
Good. Thank you for having me.